Close your eyes for a moment and picture Wall Street the way your brain has been trained to see it. A canyon of stone and glass, polished shoes, silent revolving doors, numbers moving faster than speech. Now, let that image dissolve. Strip away the towers. Pull the shoreline back to where it used to be. Replace the steady electronic hum with wind off the harbor, the creak of timber, the rattle of cart wheels, and the irregular percussion of boots on packed earth. It's 1711. Yet the street still carries the name of a wall that no longer stands. A defensive line first built in the Dutch era, running across the island from the Hudson side to the East River side, with gates that once controlled who entered and who didn't. The wall is gone by the end of the 1690s, but the memory of it remains in the route people walk every day. A thin historical scar that will later become shorthand for global finance. The western end, where power looks like wood, brick, and rituals start at the west end of the street near Broadway. And you don't meet money first, you meet institutions. Trinity Church is already here, the first Trinity erected on Wall Street in 1698, facing toward the Hudson. It is not the Gothic spire you know from postcards. Think of a modest rectangular church with a steeple that reads as an announcement. The English church is planted in the colony's most visible corridor. The yard around it is a boundary of its own. Fence lines, graves, and footpaths worn into the soil by worshippers, officials, and tradesmen who understand that the street is both a route and a stage. A short walk away sits City Hall, the seat of local government built at Wall and Nassau at the dawn of the 1700s. Its presence matters because it tells you what Wall Street is in 1711. Not yet a specialized financial district, but a mixed artery where civic authority, church life, tavern talk, and waterfront commerce collide in the same few blocks. In this era, a power shows itself through ceremony, officials moving in small clusters, documents carried in satchels, bells calling meetings, and the deliberate pace of people who expect to be watched. The street itself is narrower than the modern imagination. Its edges are uneven. The surface is not the uniform asphalt you expect. It is whatever the city can maintain. Packed earth, stone in places, ruts and puddles where rain has collected. Horses and oxen don't simply pass through. They shape the street. You smell them before you see them. Hay, damp leather, smoke from hearths, and the sharp tar used to seal wood. The air carries salt even this far inland because in 1711, inland is a shorter distance than it is today. A street defined by trade, because the port defines the town. Keep walking east and you start to feel the pull of the waterfront economy. New York in the early 1700s is a port city first, a capital second, and an experiment in growth always. Neat contemporary views from just a few years later show a skyline dominated by church spires and low civic buildings, with the harbor crowded by ships. Wall Street is visually tied to that traffic because it is one of the routes that organizes movement between town and water. In 1711, the East River shoreline sits much closer to Wall Street than it does today. Places that are now multiple blocks inland were once near the water's edge. That matters because a street near the water is never purely local. Every crate unloaded, every barrel rolled, every ledger balanced is part of a wider circuit. Britain, the Caribbean, the Atlantic world. Later sources quantify how busy the port becomes in the early 1700s, with hundreds of vessels a year using New York's harbor in that period. Even without numbers, you can read the activity in the choreography. Sailors with rope-burned hands, coopers tightening hoops around barrels, and clerks checking marks on crates, and merchants who can recognize goods by smell: molasses, rum, sugar, tobacco, dried fish. Wall Street is not yet lined with banks. It is lined with people who live close to their work. A merchant's home can also be an office. A tavern can also be a newsroom. A public building can also be a marketplace in practice, because announcements, auctions, and transactions need a place to happen. The city's information system runs on proximity: who you saw, in what ship arrived, what cargo came in, what price is being whispered at the docks, what rumor just came down from the council. The ghost of the wall, a boundary turned into an address. Even though the actual wall is gone, the idea of a boundary still shapes the street. The original Dutch fortification had been built across the island's northern edge in the 1650s, stretching from the Hudson side to the East River side, with gates that controlled access. And in Dutch records, it wasn't simply the wall, but part of a broader defensive works. And the walk along it carried its own name. When the English take over and the town expands beyond the old line, the physical barrier becomes obsolete, and it is removed by 1699. But cities are stubborn. They keep old lines in new forms: streets, property boundaries, habits of movement. So, in 1711, Wall Street is a boundary that has turned into an address, a place where being seen matters, where civic life gathers, where the town's ambitions compress themselves into a few blocks. The eastern end, where the water meets the market, and the market reveals the era's brutality. Now, follow Wall Street down toward the East River end, where the port activity concentrates. Here, the street feels more utilitarian. You can hear the water more clearly, the slap against pilings, the squeal of rope through a pulley, the shouted timing between men moving a heavy load together. The smell shifts too. More brine, more fish, more wet wood, more rot in the crevices where debris collects. And here, in 1711, the city makes a decision that will stain the street's legacy in a way the later mythology of finance often tries to ignore. An official slave market opens in 1711 near the East River end of Wall Street, described as being on Wall Street between Pearl and Water Streets, and operating for decades afterward. Different historical descriptions place it at corners like Wall and Pearl or Wall and Water, but the meaning is consistent. It is at the foot of Wall Street, near the waterfront where ships and cargo enter the city. Picture the structure not as a grand building, but as something grimly practical. A wooden market house with a roof and open sides, built to hold people while transactions are made, with the city benefiting through taxes and regulation. Then it is deliberately placed where commerce is already thick, because that is where buyers are, where money circulates, where labor is demanded, and where the human reality of the Atlantic economy is easiest to convert into a normal market routine. This is the part of 1711 Wall Street that forces an honest reframe. The street's identity is not just about trade as a neutral engine. It is about what the city decides trade can include. The same corridor that hosts church bells and council meetings also becomes an officially sanctioned site for buying, selling, and renting human beings, enslaved Africans and indigenous people, under municipal oversight. There is no need to sensationalize it to feel its weight. The horror is in the bureaucracy, the routine, the scheduling, the language that turns lives into inventory. If you stand there in 1711, near the edge where the water is close, you would see how tightly linked the system is to the port. Ships arrive, cargo moves, people are counted, papers are signed. The same hands that tally barrels can tally bodies, because the city has built a logic where profit is permitted to outrank personhood. This is not a side story. It is central to understanding how a commercial city grows, and what it asks others to pay for that growth. Daily life around it, noise, a negotiation, and the performance of order. Around this market, the city continues to live. That's what makes the scene so unsettling. The coexistence. A passerby might be on the way to buy meal or tools, a sailor might be hunting for a tavern, a clerk might be sent with instructions, a merchant might be doing the mental arithmetic of risk and return. A street can carry multiple realities at once, and in 1711, Wall Street does exactly that. You would also notice that order is performed constantly, not because the city is naturally orderly, but because it is anxious. Anxious about outsiders, anxious about labor, anxious about the frontier beyond the town, anxious about rebellion, crime, fire, disease. In a small colonial city, these fears travel fast and attach themselves to people with less power. Regulations, patrols, and official sites like the market house are presented as civic management, yet they also function as control. That's why 1711 matters. The street before the myth, and the street that becomes the myth. If you only know Wall Street as a symbol of finance, 1711 feels like a contradiction, but it's actually a blueprint. Wall Street's later reputation, contracts, speculation, institutions, power concentrated in a few blocks, didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of a place where governance and commerce sat shoulder to shoulder, where proximity created influence, where information was currency, and where the city's economic identity formed around the waterfront's flows. And 1711 adds the essential truth that the city's wealth was never purely clean. The official market at the end of Wall Street shows how municipal authority and private profit could cooperate to formalize exploitation, then normalize it as just another civic function. So, what did Wall Street look like in 1711? It looked smaller, lower, wetter, more human-scaled, but not more humane. It looked like a street where you could still feel the outline of an old defensive line even after the timber was gone. It looked like a corridor where a modest church and an early city hall helped define the West End as a place of authority and ceremony. It looked like a route pulled eastward by the gravitational force of the docks. And at the water's edge, it looked like a market house built to make the unthinkable administratively ordinary, a reminder that the foundations of Wall Street include not just contracts and commerce, but the choices a city makes about whose lives count as tradable. If you want to bring 1711 to life the way your earlier Reconstruction did, sound first, image second, end the journey with a simple modern match cut. Today's Wall Street still follows that inherited line. The water is farther away, the buildings are taller. The language of trade has become abstract, but the street is still what it was then, a place where power learns how to look inevitable.